Fair Play, a novel by Pete Fisher. Chapter 31. Last Encore. The busy roundabout intersection in the southern quarter of Cologne never seemed to sleep. It bristled with bars, restaurants and takeaways. A lot of them were Turkish, so it was a kind of doner kebab central. About 50 metres up the street, Martin sat in his car, watching the blur of traffic and people go by. He'd been sitting parked up for about half an hour now, waiting for the boys, the Jungs. Arnold played drums and Mickey played bass. This was his new band. They'd call themselves Snake. They were supposed to be having a rehearsal. As usual, the boys were late. Arnold had no excuse. He was just a lazy sod on the dole. Mickey was an overworked trainee cameraman at the regional TV station. Arnold made Martin jump suddenly by tapping on the car window, grinning. They went into the courtyard and opened the door to the practice room. It was hot and stank of stale cigarettes, unwashed musicians, and an overflowing urinal. The carpet looked like several varieties of mould had already made themselves at home. Arnold sat himself down behind his kit and proceeded to deafen Martin with his warm-up routine. Martin had been lucky to find him in the small ads. He'd played in some medium-status pro outfits, but he was a moody bugger. Mick strolled in casually about 20 minutes later. He wasn't quite such a good catch. Younger and less experienced, but a good player. His lanky good looks behind a big Fender bass. The rehearsal room was unbearably hot and humid. They walked round to the kiosk to get cold beer and cokes. Rehearsals had been getting shorter as enthusiasm waned. They had one solitary gig coming up towards the end of August. They'd only played 2 since they got together a year ago. Martin drove home feeling frustrated. He was almost at the point of giving up the whole idea of being in a band. Things just hadn't worked out how he'd hoped since he'd come to Germany. It was one of the first days of spring. The sun warmed the flagstone and the cathedral bells rung nearby. Martin was standing outside the back of the language school enjoying a cigarette break. A young lady in business black with a luxuriant head of blonde hair emerged from the back door. She spotted Martin and greeted him with a sassy smile. "All right?" Daisy was actually quite shy. She hadn't been teaching long. She'd latched on to Martin. "Hey, Daisy, how's it going?" "I hate those bastards." "Who do you mean?" "Those fucking software engineers. They think they're so cool. Their English is pants." Martin chuckled. He offered her his tobacco and papers. Daisy rolled herself a conical cigarette. He offered some advice. "Don't let them get to you. Sad fuckers. They pay my rent. Make them do presentations and make fools of themselves on video." "Good thinking, Batman." Even before they got to the car park in the woods next to the lake, Martin began to feel a bit strange. He concentrated extra hard as he steered the car into a parking space. It was hot out there, after the cool of his basement flat. In a small rucksack, he had a big cold bottle of mineral water, some fruit, a couple of ready-rolled spliffs, and a lighter. Daisy got out of the car and was gazing in wonder up at the trees. It had obviously got to her pretty quickly too. They walked under the railway bridge and down the steep path through the trees to the lake. The last stretch was so steep you had to run. They both just managed to avoid running straight into the lake skidding to a halt in fits of laughter. Martin knew where there was a nice quiet place at the lakeside with a bench they could sit on. They walked on for about 200 metres and sat down in the midday sun. Martin took a long swig of water and passed it to Daisy. Fuck, I'm out of it. Me too. These shrooms are good. Martin was now having some nice visuals. Little rainbows blending in with the sparkling ripples on the lake's surface. The cicadas reminded him of Italy. Suddenly he felt really sad. Then a minute later he was laughing his head off. Daisy had waded into the water up to her knees. She was holding up her summer dress and kicking out water, sending glittering showers of droplets up into the sunlight. She screamed with delight. Martin was a lot higher than he'd expected. He'd been there before, so to speak. It was that feeling of no going back now for a few hours. Best to relax and let it happen. He fished out one of the spliffs he'd brought and lit it. There was almost no wind. The smoke curled around in the sunlight in intricate patterns. The fragrant cloud lingered around him. He passed it to Daisy. She came and sat next to him, putting her head on his shoulder. In lots of ways they couldn't have been happier. The afternoon drifted by. Dragonflies with shimmering, brilliantly coloured wings came and hovered over the water at their feet. Frogs struck up a distant croaking chorus on the other side of the lake. The reed beds rustled and the scent of pines hung in the hot summer air. Martin could feel the mushrooms had worn off considerably. In fact, he started to feel almost normal. But he had a raging thirst. They'd drunk all the water. They walked back to the car and went into the beer garden. It was in a clearing in the woods near the little railway station. It was right next to the tracks, separated only by an earth bank and a line of trees. Every hour or so, a train roared past, rattling the glasses on the tables. Martin got himself a half-litre of shandy. Daisy had a large lemonade. The beer garden was quite crowded. They got the last of the tables at the side, which had wood and thatch roofs to keep off the sun. Boy, that tastes good. Martin had drunk almost half his shandy in one go. Shrooms make you thirsty. Martin laughed. They made me feel all kinds of things. Yeah, but they're nice. Daisy was a much more experienced mushroom traveller than Martin. She'd taken the whole afternoon in her stride. They were both relatively straight now. She picked her moment to drop the bombshell into their psychedelic picnic. Martin, there's something I've got to tell you. I don't want to spoil your day, though. Depends what it is. I've been thinking about it for ages. Now I've decided. What? Daisy lit one of her conical roll-ups, took a drag and exhaled. The woman at the next table sniffed suspiciously. I've decided to go back to England. I want to do an MA. What? Fuck. When? Term starts in 6 weeks. I'm leaving the end of this month. Jesus, that's only 2 weeks. What about us? There won't be an us. I'm sorry, Martin. I have to get on and live my life. I can't do long distance, love. It's not fair. Fucking hell. Martin felt like the heavy thatch roof above them had just fallen on his head. This was some nightmarish kind of déjà vu. This lovely young lady, who he'd probably fallen in love with, just wasn't going to be around anymore. There would be no joint future. He was flying solo again. It wasn't exactly Woodstock. It wasn't anything like a real festival, but it was an open-air gig. This was the third and last time Snake were to perform live. It was only a week since Daisy had gone home. Martin would rather have shut himself indoors, but this had been booked for months. That afternoon, Martin stood on the wood and scaffolding stage, looking around the tents and marquees. It was somewhere between Boy Scout and weekend hippie. He was in a clearing in the woods, about 20 minutes from where he lived. It was a hot August Saturday. The sound of crickets all around. What the summer camp lacked in sex and drugs, it made up for in rock and roll. They put on live bands several nights a week. Snake were headlining this last evening. At the back of the audience area stood a fat, bad-tempered, bearded guy manning a large mixing desk, taking it all very seriously. Despite the racks of equipment and thick cables, it still sounded like shit. Arnold was whacking his drums one by one while the mixer guy twiddled and grunted instructions into a mic. Mickey sat with his legs hanging over the lip of the stage. He had his bass on his lap and a cigarette dangling nonchalantly from the corner of his mouth. His pilot sunglasses reflected the late afternoon sun. Martin waited patiently for his turn. He gave it all he'd got that night. A small lighting rig above them lent a touch of glamour. The haze of campfire and barbecue that blew across the stage was the next best thing to dry ice. The lighting guy had that too. He succeeded in concealing the band completely at one point. Martin almost choked on the songs he'd written about Daisy. The added tristesse gave his vocals an even bluesier touch. His elongated, echoey space rock solo elicited quite a few cheers. They switched in all the lights they had for the finale. As the final song came to an end, someone handed out sparklers. Snake had gone down well, but Martin was glad it was all over.